So here are some ideas I have for making um, shipping and transport of materials more friendly or less, and also just in general better. One is to have offshore unloading and transfer, so we can make it from boat to another boat that's smaller. This will let you have bigger boats in the Arctic Ocean. And bigger boats in the Arctic Ocean have many advantages. One is they're more stable, which can mean more delicate items, less chance of problems happening during storms and all these other things when could go wrong, less likely to go wrong. It could also reduce energy costs because your boat is less bumping around and everything and pieces in it. It means it might last longer. When you make bigger components, oftentimes it's more efficient to manufacture them, and they work more efficiently because you have less loss of the size scale. For example, one is motors. Magnetic motors are more efficient if you make them bigger because some of the magnetic fields and electric currents and stuff leak away. But the bigger it is, the less they leak away. Now you do have a heating problem, but you can design it with better heat management with the bigger it is. Stuff like that. Same as with heat goes up with the size, but like you can add more fins and stuff also, so you have the balance with heat when you make electric motors too big. But yeah, or you can have and then you also one I wanted to say about that is kind of also less friction because yes, a bigger object has more friction, but for the same volume, it has less friction comparatively than a small object with a bigger surface area. This also needs to be less planning and maintenance because you have a less big of a fleet going on. You can use more of the same routes, stuff like that. Can really save on maintenance and cost right there. Less pieces overall because you have all these different things that are not going as much well. Sorry, not less pieces because you don't have to have repeat pieces again, and you can also just scale again. So another idea kind of I have is to make a hybrid, what I'm going to call plane boat. This has both the abilities to be a plane and boat, which a lot of things have. Flying is one of the least energy efficient methods, while boat travel is one of the most energy efficient. So having it maybe as a boat during part of it journey when it can go slower, and then a plane during some parts where it goes faster might help. Or it could help with maybe one of these things are more drones to unload and offload bigger vehicles. Or you could have it stop and be a boat for a little while it's refueling. And then it could take off when it's refueling electricity. Something along those lines. You could also maybe think about more amphibious crafts that go from land to water to save electricity while it's in the water. I think there's a wide range of possibilities there. Also, planes landing in water might be a better idea than landing ground because you need less infrastructure potentially and maybe less environmental problems. Having offshore stations that could recharge boats or something like that could make electric boats more compatible, more efficient. And I mean more efficient because they'll have less batteries on them, and less batteries means less weight, which means they can be more efficient. Also, offshore recharging could make the whole thing more efficient by because electricity has to travel less distance, and also potentially you don't convert the electricity to AC ever. You just give it DC. Converting from DC to AC to DC back, like many electric chargers, you lose a significant amount of energy. So you could charge faster with less loss of energy and stuff like that. Another idea would be to have it have it in ways that the actual batteries are replaced all at once by exchanges, which means that you could recharge it to full capacity a lot faster without stops and maybe a smaller battery. Again, Another idea for air travel more, maybe for boats, but mostly for air travel, is if we really can't get it, we can use a methane fuel cell. So fuel cells work a lot more efficient than a combustion engine, and fuel cells work by turning. It's kind of like a battery, but instead you pump in the gas or liquid on one side, you pump it in air on the other side, or oxygen or something, and it kind of turns that electricity without it having the physical battery that keeps it stored. Fuel cells are usually not as efficient as batteries for a variety of reasons. You can customize the chemistry as well, the conditions are not as controlled, and so on and so on. But they're more efficient than heat engines like a gasoline internal combustion engine. And electric motors are super efficient. Also, fuel cells work bigger on bigger scales, so bigger scale boat might work better. Now, how would I make this methane for this? This is where I'm really talking about more the innovation is. Biofuels are a horrible waste of electricity. You can produce 10 to over 100 times more energy by having a solar field locally, and wind also does a lot more energy for the same amount. So biofuels really are not as sustainable as people make them out to be. But if you take biofuels, produce hydrogen, and you can change this biofuels then into methane by adding extra hydrogens to it. Methane has a lot more power for the same amount of weight, but we need to think about also how to store methane better so we have those problems to go. Hydrogen nowadays is not generating the most green way, but there's processes like the STEP that could potentially generate in a very green way from seawater and also produce valuable metals. How the STEP process kind of works is that you take the water, you superheat up in a molten electrolyte, and then you put electricity through it, and the heat is used more efficient than a heat engine to drive stuff because it's not limited by something called a Carnot cycle, which has a limit due to temperature differences. Well, this is the raw energy from temperature. Then you put electricity and it splits it up. And molten electrolyte lets you concentrate stuff much more efficiently, so more energy actually goes into the right place. Another idea to increase the efficiency of everything is to make sure more stuff is locally produced. By having more stuff locally produced, it has to just travel less distance. This can be from food to basic infrastructure to everything. But we might need to figure out tax incentives or other incentive programs to really boom up a local industry. Another idea kind of along these lines is also to make an incentive for people to live in certain locations so stuff has to travel less distance, or it travels more efficiently by ports or by other systems near like railways and stuff like that. In fact, in the old days, this was a huge incentive, and why you had railway towns and stuff like that along railroads and stuff like that just all the time popped up. Some quicker ideas to rattle off is to have a multi-delivery system where it figures out to combine deliveries better together. You can imagine like figuring out better software for like Uber Eats or Grubhub or something where more orders are taken in one car delivery at a time, and some people sacrifice some time and waiting time for this whole thing to do it. So a multi-delivery system could really, really help make this whole thing more efficient. You also could figure out better AIs and algorithms, because this is a huge problem in AI and algorithms, the traveling salesman problem. That's a lot more difficult than you think to make everything more efficient. A huge potential just to do a bunch of things. You could have night robots that deliver more stuff at night when human beings can't see or can't do stuff as well. And if they could do it, it would take off some slack from sleep-deprived people, so less accidents and bad things would happen, less delays. But also, you could reduce the amount of traffic and make everything more efficient because you have less stop and go, but also less people drive less at night. And robots could potentially have sensors that work better at night than a human being while being awake. And also, during night, you could have longer travels than during day Because people just want that stuff in the morning more often, not in the middle of the night. So you could take your time driving, or something like that. Better weather reports could really help, and our whole weather infrastructure is really falling out of the sky, and weather satellites are just decaying and not being upkept at all. So, huge thing we could do right there. Another thing we could do is have more people living in complexes or complex buildings, so we can just deliver outside one building, and instead of having to deliver buildings with separate yards that are farther apart and more distance. This would also make it easier for robots to manage everything and work better in delivery systems themselves. Having items that have mobile uses, so you have to deliver less items themselves, could also be an idea right here for this whole thing. Having better roads could really reduce dangers of accidents, but also not only dangers of accidents, but it could also reduce fuel consumption, because a lot of it's used by friction and potholes. It can increase predictability, so we can design better systems. And maybe we could use something like Google Earth or like other ones to really figure out which roads are in need of repair more often. Or we can use like driver data to figure that out and build better roads that way. And so also we'll link a couple other things I've talked about designing better roads, from roads that do not get as wet as much, so it's better traction and also better for the environment, to roads that are less damaged by ice and stuff like that, also more visible. Then that's not also including just designing better road systems themselves, where you have systems that can figure out a variety of, how would I say it, they can handle a variety of different road conditions. Better traffic lights, like smarter ones that could detect traffic more and engage the cars. Stuff like that. Also, if we have just a system that's more virtual, it could be a huge help. And by virtual, I mean like less paper-based and stuff like that. Less commuting right there. And also less people on the roads means we could have faster roads, potentially because less people on it, but more robots could also, because less predictable, because you don't have to factor in humans as much. And deliveries could also just be more on times with less stops and starts, because less traffic. Having items that are more compatible, I'm going to say, could also be a huge help. And by compatible, which I might have misspelled, I mean you can take them and fold them down, or you can take less space, and that means you can pack more items in a single van or something, and that could make it more, and because it's not taking as many trips, you can save electricity that way, or gas or something. But also the friction can be air friction will be less, because you don't have everything more in compact small space. And you can also figure out how to have less traffic, which means less traffic jams, less potential for something to go wrong. So this could be a very good design principle itself. Another thing is just having stuff less perishable, so you have to make less waste in the first place. And kind of going along that idea is to make items that are what I'm going to call sanitizable in different ways, so they have less germs or bacteria that could decay everything. And you could inventing sanitizing methods, such as things that shoot out particle radiation that kill stuff, which will not make anything radioactive. Get rid of that fear. Also, having better climate-controlled environments that don't use an enormous amount of energy could be a huge benefit, because these better climate-controlled environments would also make sure that you can transport more stuff longer distance, but they won't perish, in fact. So maybe reduce the amount of junk, and also at your house. Promoting recycling could also be a way to promote local manufacturing, so stuff doesn't travel as much, and reduce waste yet again to landfills and stuff. Also, with recyclability, having more exchange programs of like old laptops and stuff like that could also really help, or old clothes and stuff like that with local. That all could also really help right there. Another thing is to make stuff itself more durable, so we need to replace it less often. And the last idea for here is to make stuff more interchangeable. And by that I mean we could interchange pieces with different things, so we don't always have to replace the whole thing, less transport. But also if we can interchange stuff so it's different configurations, so it can do different things, that will be a great idea. And also just in general, more multi-use things. Well, thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe. It really helps channel out. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers in a year and 4,000 watch hours. It's really hard. With your help, I think you can do it. Goodbye.